She inhaled deeply, pushing past the ache in her chest, and forced herself to move. The house was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when the walls echoed with laughter, when tiny feet pitter-pattered across the wooden floor, and the sweet scent of lavender and vanilla lingered in the air. But that was before the silence became her only companion. Evelyn made her way to the kitchen, where a single coffee cup sat on the counter. It was the same cup her son, Lucas, had painted for her on his 4th birthday. His tiny hands had smeared bright blue and yellow paint across the ceramic, proudly declaring, "Mommy's best boy." She traced the letters with her fingertips, swallowing the lump in her throat. Lucas had been everything. Her light, her reason to wake up every morning, her entire world. And now he was gone. Her grip tightened around the cup as the memories came rushing back. The way his little arms used to wrap around her waist when he was scared. The sound of his giggles when she tickled his belly. The way he whispered, "I love you, Mommy," before bedtime. His sleepy voice full of warmth and trust. A sharp pang of guilt stabbed at her chest. She had failed him. The morning Lucas disappeared had been like any other. She had woken up late, rushing through her usual routine, while Lucas, full of boundless energy, bounced around the house, singing some silly song he had learned at daycare. He had insisted on wearing his red sneakers, the ones with the blinking lights, even though they were getting too small. She had kissed his forehead, buckled him into his car seat, and dropped him off at school. And that was the last time she ever saw him. The memory sent a shiver down her spine. The police had searched everywhere. They had questioned everyone. Teachers, neighbors, strangers who had been in the area that morning. But there were no answers, no clues, no witnesses. One moment, Lucas had been a happy little boy on his way to class. The next, he had vanished without a trace. Evelyn felt her breath hitch, her fingers trembling as she reached for the newspaper on the counter. The headline glared at her, bold and unforgiving. 3 years since local boy Lucas Parker went missing. Mother still searching for answers. She clenched her jaw, her nails digging into her palm. 3 years. 3 years of searching. 3 years of sleepless nights, endless prayers and unanswered questions. 3 years of hope slowly turning into desperation. The police had given up long ago. The news stations had moved on. Even the neighbors who once pitied her had stopped asking how she was doing. People forget, but Evelyn wouldn't. She grabbed her keys and jacket, ignoring the ache in her tired bones. Today was like every other day. She would walk the same streets, ask the same questions, visit the same places, because somewhere, someone knew the truth, and she wouldn't stop until she found it. She stepped outside, locking the door behind her. The wind was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves, but Evelyn barely noticed. She walked past the old playground, where the swings creaked under the weight of the breeze. Lucas had loved that playground. She could still see him there, chasing butterflies, his tiny face glowing with joy. Her heart clenched. A movement in the distance caught her attention. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark hoodie, was standing near the playground fence. He wasn't playing with any kids. He wasn't jogging or walking a dog. He was just watching. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She had spent years scanning crowds, memorizing faces, chasing ghosts. But something about this man made her instincts scream. She forced herself to keep walking, her fingers curling into fists as she reached into her pocket, gripping the small photograph she always carried, a picture of Lucas. She had asked a million strangers before, flashing the photo with shaking hands and a broken voice. "Have you seen my son?" Most people had given her looks of pity. Some had shaken their heads, others had simply walked away. But when she reached the man holding up the photo, he didn't react the way she expected. His eyes flickered to the picture, and for the briefest second, something flashed across his face. Recognition. Her pulse spiked. Evelyn knew that look. She had spent 3 years searching for it. Before she could speak, before she could demand answers, the man turned and walked away. Panic surged through her veins. "Wait!" she called out, her voice cracking. "Do you know him? Have you seen my son?" The man didn't stop. Evelyn's heart pounded violently in her chest as she made a split-second decision. She ran after him. Evelyn's legs moved before her mind could process what she was doing. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts as she sprinted after the man. "Wait!" she shouted again, her voice cracking. But he didn't stop. He turned the corner, disappearing down a narrow alleyway between two abandoned buildings. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She followed, her sneakers slamming against the pavement, her pulse roaring in her ears. The alley was dimly lit, damp with the scent of rotting wood and rain-soaked trash. The man was a few feet ahead of her, his dark hoodie pulled up, his broad shoulders tense. He knew she was following him. "Why are you running?" she screamed, her desperation spilling over. "Do you know my son?" He didn't answer. Evelyn pushed herself harder, her body fueled by 3 years of pain, of searching, of never-ending nightmares. The man was fast, but she wasn't stopping. Not now, not when she had finally seen something real. He turned another corner, and suddenly he was gone. Evelyn skidded to a halt, her chest heaving. She looked around frantically. The alley was empty, too empty. No door creaked, no footsteps echoed. Nothing. He had vanished. A sharp pain bloomed in her chest as she gripped the photograph of Lucas in her trembling fingers. He had looked at it, really looked at it. That was recognition. I know it was. Tears burned in her eyes as she spun around, trying to find something, anything. And then she saw it, a small piece of paper, folded neatly, tucked under a loose brick in the alley wall. It hadn't been there before. Evelyn's fingers shook as she pulled it free, unfolding it with frantic urgency. Her breath hitched. There were only 5 words written on it. "He's alive. Stop searching. Walk away." Evelyn's world tilted. Her knees nearly buckled. Her vision blurred as the words burned into her mind, her fingers crushing the paper. "He's alive." She wanted to scream, to cry, to run. But then her eyes landed on the last 2 words. "Walk away." A chill crept up her spine. This wasn't a message of hope. It was a warning. Someone didn't want her to keep looking. And that meant someone had Lucas. A slow, burning rage built inside her, replacing the fear, the helplessness. She had spent 3 years searching, 3 years being told to move on, to accept the unknown. But now, for the first time, she had proof. She wasn't walking away, not now, not ever. She was going to find her son, and whoever had taken him, they were going to regret it. Evelyn's fingers clenched around the note so tightly that the edges cut into her skin. Her breath came in uneven gasps, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. "He's alive." The words played over and over in her mind, louder than anything else. She had spent 3 years drowning in uncertainty, staring at empty streets, questioning every face she passed. She had spent 3 years wondering if Lucas was out there somewhere, if he was scared, if he was waiting for her to find him. And now, someone knew the truth. But they wanted her to stop. Evelyn forced herself to steady her breathing. She wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to be scared away by a cryptic note. She spun around, searching the alley, looking for anything, anyone. But there was no one. The man in the hoodie was gone, vanished like a ghost. Her pulse still racing, she shoved the note into her pocket and turned back the way she came. If she was being watched, she needed to be smart. Running into the unknown wouldn't help Lucas. She needed a plan. By the time she reached her car, her hands were trembling. She gripped the steering wheel, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wild, her face paler than usual. But there was something else there now. Determination. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she hadn't called in over a year. After a few rings, a groggy voice answered. "Evelyn?" "Detective Harris," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I need your help." There was a long pause. "Evelyn, I told you. There's nothing more we can do." "I have proof," she cut in. "Someone knows where Lucas is." Silence. Then his tone changed. "Where are you?" "Outside the old playground near 5th Avenue, she said quickly. "I chased a man. He ran, but he left me a note." "A note?" Harris's voice sharpened. "What did it say?" Evelyn swallowed. "It said, 'He's alive. Stop searching. Walk away.'" The detective let out a long breath. Evelyn, I know what you're going to say, she interrupted, but I'm not stopping. This is the first lead I've had in 3 years. I need you to help me, please. A beat of hesitation. Then finally, meet me at my office in 20 minutes. Evelyn didn't waste a second. She started the car, her hands gripping the wheel as she pulled onto the road. She didn't know where this was going. She didn't know what she was about to uncover. But she did know one thing. She was closer to finding Lucas than ever before, and she wasn't turning back. Evelyn's car sped through the quiet streets, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The city lights flickered past her, but she barely noticed. Her mind was spinning. The note, the man in the hoodie, the words that had shattered her world all over again. He's alive. She pulled into the parking lot of the police station, barely shutting off the engine before she threw the door open. The air was crisp, but she didn't feel the cold. She felt fire. Inside, Detective Harris was waiting for her, standing near his desk with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked exhausted, like someone who had long ago given up on hope. She slammed the note onto his desk. Tell me this doesn't mean anything. Harris picked it up, reading it carefully. His jaw tightened. Where did you find this? She crossed her arms. A man left it in an alley after I confronted him. His brow furrowed. And you didn't recognize him? No, she said, shaking her head. But he recognized Lucas. Harris let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand down his face. Evelyn, his voice was careful, hesitant. You know I want to believe this, but it's been 3 years. People, they play cruel tricks. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists. This isn't a trick. He ran. Why would he run if he wasn't hiding something? Harris didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the nearly empty station before lowering his voice. Even if this is real, Evelyn, whoever wrote this doesn't want you digging any deeper. Evelyn stared at him. I don't care. She saw the hesitation in his eyes, the battle between logic and hope. Finally, he sighed. Okay, let's do this right. He turned to his desk, pulling up old case files. You said the man was watching the playground. That's near where Lucas disappeared, right? Evelyn nodded. Yes. Then let's go back to the beginning. Harris flipped through the reports. That day, there were no witnesses, no security cameras near the school, but someone had to see something. Evelyn's heart raced. What are you saying? Harris exhaled. I'm saying we missed something. And if someone knows Lucas is alive, that means this isn't just a kidnapping. He looked at her, his expression dark. It's a cover-up. Evelyn felt her entire body go cold. For 3 years, she had believed she was searching for her missing son. But now the truth was unraveling in front of her. Lucas hadn't just disappeared. Someone had made him disappear. And now she needed to find out why, before it was too late. Evelyn's heart pounded violently in her chest. A cover-up. The word sent an icy chill through her veins. For years, she had believed Lucas had been kidnapped by a random stranger, taken in a cruel act of fate. But this was something else. Who would cover up a missing child? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harris rubbed his jaw, flipping through the case files with a hardened expression. Someone with power. Someone who doesn't want Lucas to be found. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat. Then we find them. Harris gave her a look, one filled with worry, caution. This isn't just about looking through old reports, Evelyn. If this really is a cover-up, we're dealing with people who will do anything to keep their secrets buried. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Then let them try. She wasn't scared, not anymore. She had spent 3 years in the dark. That ended today. Harris sighed, knowing there was no stopping her. He tapped his pen against one of the case reports. Okay, let's start with the day Lucas went missing. You said he had been wearing red sneakers, right? Evelyn nodded. With blinking lights. Harris scanned the report. The search teams never found those sneakers. If Lucas was taken, why wouldn't the kidnapper get rid of them? Evelyn's stomach twisted. Because he wasn't supposed to be taken. Harris's eyes flickered up. What do you mean? She exhaled sharply, pushing back the flood of emotions. What if Lucas wasn't taken by a stranger? What if someone needed him gone but couldn't hurt him? Harris sat back, considering. A staged disappearance? Evelyn nodded slowly. Someone wanted him out of sight but alive. She clenched her fists. And now someone is telling me to stop looking. The detective's gaze darkened, which means someone close to him knows the truth. Evelyn's breath hitched. The school, Lucas's daycare, was the last place he had been seen. Someone there had to have seen something. Harris read her mind. Let's start at the school. Evelyn's pulse spiked as she grabbed her coat, her fingers trembling. For 3 years, she had been searching in the wrong places. Now she was going straight to the source. The daycare had changed over the years. The once colorful murals on the walls were now faded, and the jungle gym in the back had been replaced with new equipment. But the weight of the past still lingered. Evelyn stepped inside, her stomach a knot of nerves. The last time she had been here, Lucas had been holding her hand, smiling up at her. A receptionist looked up from the front desk, her expression turning guarded the moment she recognized Evelyn. Evelyn. The woman, Mrs. Carter, the daycare director, straightened. I didn't expect to see you here. Evelyn ignored the pity in her voice. I need to ask you something. Mrs. Carter hesitated, her fingers tapping against the desk. Evelyn, we've been through this. This time it's different. Evelyn pulled out the note and placed it on the counter. Someone left this for me. Mrs. Carter's face paled. Evelyn saw it, the flicker of fear. You know something, don't you? Evelyn's voice shook. Please, if you know anything, tell me. Mrs. Carter's eyes darted to the security cameras, her lips pressing together. She was scared. Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth. Mrs. Carter's breathing was uneven now. She looked around once more before leaning forward. Not here, she whispered. Meet me at the diner on 8th Street in an hour. Evelyn's stomach nodded. She knew. Mrs. Carter knew something. And now, for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn was about to get answers. Evelyn sat in the dimly lit corner of the diner, her hands curled around a cup of untouched coffee. The air was thick with the smell of bacon and burnt toast, but she barely noticed. Her entire body was tense, her mind racing with possibilities. Mrs. Carter knew something. The daycare director had spent years brushing off Evelyn's questions, insisting that she had told the police everything. But now she had agreed to meet in secret. That meant only one thing. She had been hiding the truth all along. The door chimed as Mrs. Carter stepped inside, her coat pulled tightly around her frame, her expression wary. She scanned the diner before quickly slipping into the seat across from Evelyn. You shouldn't have come to the school, she muttered. It's not safe. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Not safe for who? Me? Or the people who took my son? Mrs. Carter flinched, glancing around nervously. I shouldn't be here. Evelyn leaned forward, her voice low and urgent. Then why did you come? Mrs. Carter hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, she pulled a small faded photograph from her purse and slid it across the table. Evelyn's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was a picture of Lucas, but it wasn't the same one the news had circulated. This was taken after he disappeared. Evelyn's vision blurred as she traced her son's face with her fingertips. He looked older, a little thinner, but he was alive. Tears welled in her eyes. Where did you get this? Mrs. Carter's voice shook. A man dropped it off at the daycare a year after Lucas vanished. He didn't say anything, just left the envelope on my desk and walked out. Evelyn's breath came in sharp bursts. Why didn't you tell me? Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with guilt. Because I was told not to. Evelyn's blood ran cold. By who? Mrs. Carter swallowed hard. There was a woman. She came to me the day after the photo was left. She said if I ever spoke to you about it, bad things would happen. Evelyn's hands tightened into fists. Describe her. Mrs. Carter hesitated. She was tall, blonde, expensive suit. She spoke calmly, but her eyes were cold, like she didn't feel anything. A chill crept up Evelyn's spine. This wasn't some random abduction. This was calculated, planned. She forced herself to steady her voice. Did she say anything else? Mrs. Carter nodded slowly. She told me to forget the photo. She said, Mrs. Carter took a shaky breath. She said Lucas was where he belonged. Evelyn's entire world tilted. Where he belonged. She felt like she couldn't breathe. Who were these people? What did they want with her son? Mrs. Carter wiped at her eyes. I wanted to tell you. I did. But I was scared. She lowered her voice. And I still am. Evelyn stared at the photo, her pulse pounding. 3 years. For 3 years, she had been chasing shadows. But now she had proof. Lucas was alive, and someone had taken him on purpose. Her fingers curled around the photograph as she stood up. Thank you for telling me, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Mrs. Carter shook her head. Evelyn, please let it go. If you keep pushing. Evelyn met her gaze, her body humming with rage and determination. I'm not letting anything go, she said. Not until I bring my son home. She turned and walked out of the diner, her entire life narrowing down to one singular mission. Find Lucas and destroy whoever had taken him. Evelyn gripped the photograph of Lucas as she stepped out of the diner, her heart pounding like a war drum. The cool evening air bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. Her son was alive. The proof was in her trembling hands. The past 3 years of pain, doubt, and sleepless nights had all led to this moment. The blurry memories of him laughing in her arms weren't just echoes of the past. He was still out there somewhere, waiting for her. But now she knew the truth. He hadn't just been taken. He had been placed somewhere, hidden, stolen, and whoever had done it thought they could keep her from finding him. They were wrong. She yanked her phone from her pocket, her fingers trembling as she dialed Detective Harris. He picked up on the second ring. Evelyn? She didn't waste time. I have proof. A pause, then his voice sharpened. What kind of proof? She stared at the photo in her hands. A picture of Lucas, taken after he disappeared. Harris cursed under his breath. Where did you get it? Mrs. Carter had it, she said. Someone left it at the daycare. And there's more. She swallowed hard, her fury barely contained. A woman, blonde, expensive suit, came after the photo was dropped off. She told Mrs. Carter to forget it. She said Lucas was where he belonged. Silence. Then Harris's voice dropped into something dark. This isn't just a kidnapping. No, Evelyn said, gripping the phone tighter. It's bigger than that. Harris let out a slow breath. Okay, listen to me. If this is a cover-up, then the people behind it have resources, power, connections. We can't just walk into this blind. Evelyn's chest tightened. Then what do we do? A pause. Then Harris said the words she had been waiting 3 years to hear. We take them down. A rush of hope and rage swirled inside her. Where do we start? Harris was already moving, already pulling up files. We find the woman. She made a mistake by showing her face. We track her. We find out who she works for. And then, Evelyn's voice was steady, cold. Harris didn't hesitate. Then we get Lucas back. A shudder passed through her body. This was real. This was happening. For 3 years, she had been living in a nightmare with no end in sight. But now she could finally see the way out. And she wasn't stopping until Lucas was back in her arms. Her grip tightened on the photo, her pulse hammering. I'm coming, baby, she whispered. Mommy's coming. And this time, nothing was going to stop her.